So today we're going to talk about one of the subjects of this in this week's Parsha, a huge subject, Parsha Shemini, and that is the laws or some of the laws of kashrus. Specifically, those laws that govern which creatures are permissible to eat and which are not. Now, many commentaries say, classic commentaries, that the laws of kashrut fall under the category of those laws that there's no explanation, at least not for us. It's a choik, it's a divine statute that transcends and is beyond logic. What's immoral, what's wrong with eating meat and milk, or this particular animal or the other? So what I'm going to do is share with you, in fact, some reason and insight and lessons to be learned from the laws of kashrus. The first observation is, you'll notice that the animals and birds that the Torah allows us to eat are all docile. No carnivores, no birds of prey. So there's a profound explanation right there. You are what you eat. We are affected by what we eat. And so the Torah, God doesn't want us to eat animals that are aggressive. God knows you don't have to aggravate our own aggressive natures. You have enough to contend with as we are born. And for the same reason, even a kosher animal that is kosher, the blood has to be removed, salted or broiled. In the case of the liver, there's a lot of blood there. Because the blood's the carrier of life. The soul is invested in the blood, and that's what gives life to the body. So even a kosher animal is a further step in toning down the animal instinct by the removal of blood. That explains, gives some insight in terms of the kosher animals and birds. We're going to go a little bit deeper as well. So let's identify the following three categories of permissible living creatures. Mind you, we've talked about this in the past and something very familiar to you. Why altogether would we be allowed to eat a living creature? We can subsist very well on produce, and probably far more healthier, certainly nowadays. The answer to that question is, as you know, just to briefly share this again, in principle, we ought not to, unless we are elevating the creature. How do you elevate the creature? If it's kosher, there's a blessing before and a blessing afterwards. If we eat in a dignified manner, and most importantly, with the energy that we get from the food, we serve God or our fellow man, which is serving God, then we elevate the soul of, or the energy of that living creature that we have consumed. And if we're not elevating it, then we shouldn't be. In fact, if we're not elevating it, we're degrading it. Because if we eat ourselves in a non-dignified manner, there's no blessing before or after, God forbid. With the energy which we get from the food we don't serve, we've degraded the animal. Because the animal is a creature created by God and fulfills its function and purpose without deviation. It's not bad. No animal is bad. That's how they're created. Only we can be good or bad because we were endowed with free choice. So when we consume the animal, the fish, whatever it is, and we take that energy, it's transferred. Energy is never lost. It's a new discovery, relatively new science, but an old truth in Torah. The energy is not lost, it's transferred. And to some degree, we ingest it. So if, when we eat, we then serve God, we've elevated the animal or the creature, because they can't serve God. They just behave as they are created. Service, by definition, means choice. I could or could not, and I choose to. That's service. That's connection. That's a relationship. A true relationship is one that we invest in. The Jewish ideal is not falling in love. Falling in love means it happens to you. That's not a relationship. Relationship is investing love, giving love, devotion. That's a matter of choice. So, again, when we, in consuming the creature, by choice now use that energy for a mitzvah, whatever it is, then we've elevated it. Not only do we have a right to it, that's what the creature would want, is to become part of our relationship with the God, the soul of the creature. All things have a soul. And that's why our sages say that the ignorant, we don't mean here ignorant so much as in academia, but spiritually unrefined, should not eat meat. Because to eat meat in a refined, godly manner requires a real devotion because of the tremendous energy that the animal has. Except for Shabbos and Yom Tov. They should refrain from eating meat during the week. Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's a mitzvah, so there's going to be some degree of elevation, notwithstanding their own unrefined experience. It's just merely sensual and so on, craving for food. Notwithstanding that, because it's a mitzvah on Shabbos, there's elevation. But if it's not Shabbos, our sages say that each person will judge himself, the unrefined should refrain from eating meat. You're not doing animal any favor. You may be doing it a disfavor. I'm not saying this in practice. Eating in good health, of course, kosher, a bracha, some degree of elevation is affected, or a great degree of elevation. At any rate, so that's just a general idea about the permissibility or even the mitzvah on Shabbos and Yom Tov to eat fish, to eat meat. Not to get into some detail. So there are three categories of living things that we are allowed to eat, aside from produce, growing things. And they are these animals, kosher animals. As you all know, they have to have two signs. True, they can't have split feet. If we have time, we'll explain the spiritual message conveyed by these two signs. There's this animal. Then there is certain fowl, birds that we're allowed to eat. And then fish. Just as an aside, also an interesting observation. When it comes to the animals, the Torah, which animals are permissible, the Torah identifies which ones we can eat. When it comes to the birds, the Torah says which ones we can't eat. And why is that? Our sages note, and it's thousands of years, and this has been borne out by science and discovery, of course. Namely, the Torah identifies the animals that are kosher because there are less kosher animals that are not kosher. So it gives us the list of the kosher ones, and the rest are not. They're the smaller number. Birds, the opposite. The Torah says which ones we can't because there are more non-kosher than kosher. It's a fascinating observation. Here we get what we can, here we get what we can't. Why not? Why the discrepancy? Answer, because here it's a shorter list and here it's a longer list. So when it comes to fowl, birds, we're told which ones we can because that is a shorter list than the ones we can't. I'm sorry, the birds we're told which ones we can't because that is a shorter list than the ones we can. And the animals are the opposite. Okay. So let's look at the detail of the actual consumption. What permits consumption? Just excuse me a second. Back in a very brief moment. Okay. So here we go. We all know that an animal to be eaten has to be slaughtered. Shchita. The laws of shchita are very complex and nuanced. And as you also, I'm sure, are all aware, to be a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, in Jewish life is a very elevated position. His degree of God-fearingness has to be even high. It's more exacting even in the rabbi. Because the laws are very, very detailed and very demanding. And there's a pressure, of course, to shecht more. The butcher wants more animals to sell. So to take your time and do it deliberately and make sure that everything is perfect requires fear of heaven, not the fear of a lesser paycheck. And also because if we're talking about the way we eat has to be in a dignified, elevated way so that we are elevating the soul of the animal, that begins with the shchita, for that matter, even before where the animal is treated. You're forbidden to maltreat, to mistreat any of God's creatures, kosher or non-kosher. Tsar balechayim, it's called. We are forbidden to inflict pain upon a living creature. The act of shchita, notwithstanding the challenges we as Jews have faced over the millennia up to this very day in Europe, in certain countries, who wish to oppose shchita, it is the most humane way of the animal's life being taken. Induces immediately the animal being unconscious. At any rate, so an animal requires shchita. Let's go to the other extreme. Fish require no shchita at all. They merely just have to be taken from the water, obviously. And birds. Here's the thing you may not know about the shchita of fowl, of a chicken or a duck. The law differs with respect to the laws of the shchita for an animal. And that is, to render a kosher shchita for an animal, the shochet has to sever both the windpipe and the gullet, the trachea and the esophagus. The majority of both channels have to be severed. When it comes to the shchita of a bird, the law is it's enough to sever one of them. Already renders it a kosher shchita. And then again, there's a fish, no shchita at all. So we have three categories. We have the animal, which is the most demanding, exacting kind of shchita. The bird, the fish requiring none at all. And I go back to the center. The bird, it requires a shchita, but not to the same degree, halachically, as the animal does. The behemoth does, the cow or the sheep. Of course, in practice, the shochet, does shecht both, but we speak in the theory of the law. If he just shechted one of them, closest to the surface of the throat, the shchita is kosher. Now we're going to explain why this is so on a spiritual level, as I've been talking till now, giving the spiritual insight into the laws of kosher animals. Why these three different laws? Before we explain that, we need to share with you the following. In Tanya, we learn that each one of us possesses, as you all know, two souls, but the truth is three. We don't often, at least in our talks, speak about the third soul, but I will now share this with you. We all possess, of course, a godly soul. The nefesh elokit, which we call the neshama. This is the essence of who we are. This is our superconscious. Although present at birth, it doesn't manifest within consciousness till bar and bat mitzvah, and even then not fully. The age of 20, when the mind develops fully, the godly soul has the potential to fully express itself in the body. Again, that's our superconscious. It's not our conscious self. Our conscious self we call the animal soul, or the animating soul. And that's the soul that animates the body. All physical desire and needs come from the animal soul as it fuses with the body. The godly soul is selfless, godly. It's or her, it's a she, they're all she, mind you. The godly soul's only desire it is to serve Hashem and can carry out his will. The godly soul has only one desire, to connect to Hashem, nothing else. Hashem is the only truth and only reality. And the animal soul, completely oblivious to the divine, locked in self and self needs. And like the animal, the physical animal was only aware of its own needs. And that's what drives its every pursuit, its every act, is hunger, thirst, or the need to copulate during the season, whatever it happens to be, cold, heat. So too, the animal soul for the human being, far more complex in terms of the needs. In fact, complex, sometimes it gets us into all kinds of complicated situations. Our needs, we need attention, we need honor, we need to be all kinds of things. Our physical needs, even for food and drink, are far more complex than the animal, who's satisfied with the basics, a bit of grass and water, and it's fine. For us, it's a whole, it's got to be a culinary experience. So, but still, it's animal. It's all about the self. These are the two classic extreme souls. That's the struggle of life. The struggle of life between the godly within us, the selfless, and the selfish. Immediate gratification, here, now, or sacrifice, devotion. That would be the impulse that we all experience that comes from our godly soul. What did we just tell you? Do we have a third soul? What's the third soul? So the third soul is not usually identified as a third soul because really it's part of the animal soul. And what that is, it's the intellect. When we say animal soul in Hebrew, nefesh bahamit, we mean the emotions, basically. But we have a nefesh sichlit, which is like the intermediate between the godly soul and the animal soul, the intellectual soul. It isn't godly, but it's not animalistic. It's pure intellect, open to truth, seeker of truth. There's a degree of objectivity there. In emotions, there's no objectivity. Emotions by nature are absolutely subjective. I feel, I want, I'm angry, I love, I fear. Justified or not, it's irrelevant. Emotions are emotions. But the intellect, which is really, if you like, that's really the consciousness. Hopefully, as human beings, that's really our world, is the world of ideas, the pursuit of truth, to understand objectively, no matter what the price is. This is the truth, this is the truth. It's the seeker. It's the seeker within us. The godly soul is not seeking. The godly soul by its nature is bound up with Hashem. And as we described, it's selfless. It's the divine within us. It's the part of us that knows the truth. It's where faith comes from. It's instinctual, it's very deep. And again, it's superconscious. The animal soul, emotions, feelings, that's our conscious. And then in between is the intellect, which again, the hallmark of a human being who deserves the title, a mensch. What does a mensch mean? A human being worthy of the title human being, not animal, is someone who's life is governed by the mind, the quest to understand, the quest for truth, and to some degree objective. It can't be absolutely objective because the mind works in a certain way. There's already a limit there, but there's objectivity. If it's logical and it's proven empirically, then the mind will say, okay, then that's we accept it. Whether it feels good, that truth feels good or not, whether that truth challenges all my emotional agendas or not. If it's the truth, it's the truth. And that's really, again, the arena of the human soul. That's where we're doing the choice. The soul is going to, the mind is going to open to the godly or harness to the animalistic. Meaning to say, I want money, glory, and attention, and therefore I'm going to become a professor and a doctor and use the mind, but what's it all for? It's just to feed the emotions of the animal soul. Or the mind is going to be open to the objective truth, ultimately responding to the godly soul's inherent knowledge that we have because the godly soul is a part of Hashem. Anyway, we get the general idea. So there's three souls. Guess what? The creatures we just identified 5 minutes ago correspond to the three souls. If you think for a moment, maybe you'll come up with who's who. Again, we identified as the animal, the bird, and the fish, the water creature. And we said that we have three souls: animal, godly, and intellectual. So who's who? Well, the first is pretty simple. I think you'd agree that the physical animal represents the animal within us. That's fairly straightforward. The other two souls, let's talk about the fish. The fish represents the godly soul. Why does the fish represent the godly soul? Because the fish exists, first of all, in water. And water in general is the symbol. It's more than the symbol, really, it's the manifestation of the divine. Mikveh, purity. Water is transparent. Water is transparent. Where there is godliness, we see through the veneer of everything. Because godliness is within everything. It's just concealed for us. Water means no concealment, it's transparent. So it's a symbol of the divine. Moreover, water as opposed to solids, it's one mass. Solids made up of different particles. Water represents unity. It's one entity. Wherever godliness is revealed, there is oneness. Where godliness is concealed, there is division, granules, sand, dry land. Furthermore, the fish, therefore existing in the water, totally nullified and one with their source, represents the godly soul that's submerged and one with the divine, the transparent, unifying truth of God. Interesting halacha that illustrates how the fish is inseparable from the water in which it lives. So there's a halacha, according to one opinion, if a person's immersing in the ocean, a woman has to go to the mikveh. And so an ocean's a kosher mikveh, it's the ultimate mikveh. Actually, it's not the ultimate. There's a greater level of mikveh than the ocean. That's a wellspring. At any rate, she's immersing, and the law is when you immerse, there can be no separation between the body and the water. So that way you can't wear clothes. Or if one does, very loose fitting, so the water can touch every part of the body. But if there's a fish on the person while the person immerses, it's a kosher immersion, because the fish is not considered a separation between the water and itself, because it can't live without the water, it's one with the water. So that's a further reason why the fish represents the godly soul, which is one with God, inseparable from God. Like the fish is inseparable from the water. We just explained why water, purification, transparency, unity, gives life, can't exist without water, is all symbolic, or it's the physical incarnate of of holiness, of Kedusha, godly soul. By the way, this is the reason we eat customarily fish on Shabbos. Fish is the meat, the food of Shabbos. So one of the reasons, by the way, interestingly, is that what's the Hebrew word for fish? Dag. Dag means fish. Dag is Dalet Gimel, two Hebrew letters, 4 and 3. No, what's 4 and 3? 7. The 7th day of the week we eat fish. Okay, that's a cute insight. But the deeper reason is because Shabbos we all enter into this aquatic spiritual state where we feel the presence of God around us, like the fish surrounded by water, the unity of Hashem in all things, like the water unifies everything. Liquids are one continuous mass, unlike solids. Every week we have this gift of Me'en Olam Haba, a taste of pure spirituality, the Messianic year of the world to come. So all the laws of Shabbat, they're not meant to curtail our freedom. Shabbos, we can't do so many things. It's the very opposite. The laws of Shabbos lift us out of the limitations of the physical world and put us in a transcendent place of spirituality. And that's something anyone who keeps Shabbat knows. And once you've tasted it properly, you can't go back. Very hard to go back. If it's true Shabbat, it's the most liberating experience. Entering into the aquatic, spiritually speaking, the world, the teeming, unified, brilliant world. The world of the ocean is full of complex and fascinating life. So to the world of spirituality is a whole world that opens up to us each week. All to say that the fish represents the godly soul, the neshama, nefesh elokit. What are we missing? Which one didn't we identify? The bird. The bird soars heavenwards. Eventually, it must come back to roost, but it flies. That represents the nefesh hasichlit, the third soul we spoke about, the intellectual soul that soars and seeks to understand the mysteries of life. It's the objective part of us. Again, that's the part where we ought reside. That ought to be our world. The world of the mind, the world of ideas. Not an abstraction, and then implement them. Once having discovered truth, to live by them. That's the bird. Here's a fascinating teaching from our sages based on the account of Bereshit. I'll go through the verses here, but you can see them for yourselves. And that is, animals are created from the earth. Birds, Torah says, from the fish. Fish from the water. And the birds, the Torah says two different things. One place it says from the water. One place it says from the earth. The answer is both. The bird is made from a combination of earth and water. Because intellect isn't holy, like the fish. But there is this water aspect to it, the objective search for truth. The bird that soars heavenward, flights of imagination. The true intellect is always breaking the box, or ought to be, trying to discover new truths, new insights, solutions to problems of life. That's the bird. So now we understand the laws of shchita. When we consume and ingest these different living creatures, there's different laws that apply. The animal's got to be shechted, a complete shchita. Both the trachea and the esophagus, the windpipe and the food pipe. What is shchita? What's shchita? I started to hint at this before when I was telling you that the shochet has to be the most spiritual person. He's the most revered person in the community. And he's held to the most exacting standards. And if he falls, take a leave of absence. Rarely ever happens, but it could. He knows. So what's shchita? So here's a quote from the Talmud. which is it's a halachic practical instruction. I'm going to explain to you the deeper meaning. Ein v'shochat ella u'moshach. What does shchita mean, says the Talmud? U'moshach, to draw. What does that mean? Halachically. In order for the shchita to be kosher, you can't take the knife and press it on the throat. You can't do a scissor motion back and forth. You can't pierce. It's got to be a fluid drawing motion. Draw. And the knife has to be extremely sharp and without the slightest nick, etc. That's the halacha. What's the spiritual meaning? What does meshicha mean? In halacha, we have, in the other areas of Jewish law, we have this notion called meshicha, which means that if I want to buy something from you, so it's, in halacha, payment isn't enough. I've got actually, if I want to buy this from you, it belongs to you, pay for it, and then I have to take it and draw it into my possession or lift it up. This is why, okay, the ksubah, the groom has to lift up an object, thereby drawing upon himself, raising it, the obligations outlined in the ksubah to respect and honor his wife, etc. All to say, meshicha means to draw from one state to the other, from one domain to the other domain. So what's the point here? An animal, as we said before, has very strong selfish instincts. If you want to use that in holiness, you've got to, it's a great work to channel those energies, the animalistic drives. You see the purpose of life. God says, don't kill, destroy your animalistic drives for food, for intimacy, and so on. Channel them, elevate them, make them godly. Draw it from one domain to a higher domain. So laws of shchita are very strict. It's got to be the windpipe and the food pipe. All of the animal tendencies that drag us down have to be severed, and now you're ready to draw that energy into the world of holiness. Why? Because it's a very challenging and very sensuous creature. Requires greater, this is spiritual we're talking now, greater work to elevate the animal within man. As we said before, that the unrefined, our sages say that don't be so quick to eat meat, because to elevate that energy requires tremendous resources and discipline and focus. Hence the laws of shchita, no compromise. We've got to, the sheikh has to draw the animal, the windpipe, breath, the food, all of that now, not sensual, but spiritual. That's work. A lot of work, because it's otherwise very physical and very, very animalistic. Then there's the fish. We go to the other extreme. The fish that to begin with represents the spiritual world. No need for shchita there to draw it. It's already represents the spiritual world. All you got to do is gather it in from the sea, and one may, as long as the fish is kosher, partake of it. Because again, it represents the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't require shchita. It requires simply to be embraced. Take it in, savor your godly soul, discover it, like the fish have to be discovered in the ocean. They're not jumping, or some fish actually jump out onto the boat. Most of them would not be kosher, although some do. There could be some fish that do. That's like a fish that's saying, take me. Godly soul just bursting to be embraced. You've got to dig deep into the waters and bring the fish out. That's the godly soul within. And once embraced, there's no need to fix it, to shecht it, to draw it. It is godly. But then in between is the bird. What's the bird? The bird is intellect. So intellect, really, again, objective, seeker of truth. Nonetheless, there's a shchita that's required. Not a full shchita that the animal needs. Does the bird require? One of the, either the esophagus or the trachea, the windpipe, or the food pipe, one of them is enough, indicating intellect, by and large, we can trust it if it's truly objective. But that's what I just said, if, because even intellect can be biased, and I'm not even aware of that. I think I'm objective, but I have an agenda. I'll only accept the truth that resonates with my animal soul, my sensual or selfish, whatever agenda I've got. Lazy, don't want to change, don't want to challenge, whatever the agenda. So there is a shechita that's required. Don't trust the intellect purely. There's a shechita, there's a drawing, a dedication from the mundane to the holy, but not to the same degree that we have to shech the animal. That's purely selfish and destructive if we don't harness it properly. Drag us down who knows where. The mind is in between the godly and the animal. So engage the mind, but know there's a direction, a shechita, an elevation, a dedication required there as well. A dedication that says, if it's the emes, pursue it till the end, no matter what the price. Truth is the truth. Don't allow agenda to distort, to justify, because the mind can play all kinds of games if it's rooted in the ego. We've got to shecht it from the ego. It's not a huge ego, like the emotions are purely egotistical, but there's the ego to the mind as well. Refuse to concede defeat. Got to be right. We all know this from our own intellectual pursuits. So there's a need for shechita there. The fish, no, the fish is the godly. So now we've explained, I hope successfully, the laws that govern the animal, the bird, and the fish, and what that means spiritually. The animal soul, the intellectual soul, and the godly soul. In Hebrew, nefesh bahamit, nefesh sichlit, that's the bird, and the water creature, the fish, the dag, nefesh ha'elokit. So here, friends, this is sharing with you something from the Rebbe's writings, where what appears to be just laws that defy human comprehension, but everything in Torah is, on the one hand, beyond understanding. That's true, but at the same time, God in His kindness has enveloped it and wrapped it in profound layers of meaning, which we shared with you a little bit today. Okay, so thank you all for joining. Any questions or comments? We'd love to hear you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Just 1 second.
I have a question.
Wait a minute.
How is
Hang on a second, please.